Hi everybody, it's me, Jennifer Stenhouse from Little Metal Foxes, and we are live, so I am very excited. Julia Lowther is going to be joining me this evening, and we're going to be talking about some solder and solutions and all different kinds of solder. We do have our solder essentials coming up this weekend, and that's going to be great. Hi everybody. And the nice thing about that is that even if you have some soldering skills, it's going to make it that much better. So we're real excited to be doing that this weekend. And Julie's going to join me here in just a few minutes to be able to pitch in her 2 cents on solder and all things that are solder. So, oh, there's Kinsey. Hey, Kinsey. So yeah, solder tonight. So we'll talk about all kinds of different forms and the tricks that we use, and there's a lot of forms of solder out there that you may not be aware of that can make your life so much easier. We are, hey Ellen, how are you? We're so used to, I think, when we're taking classes and stuff, to be able to have, hard, medium, and easy solder, and it all comes in wire, or it all comes in sheet, just depending on, where you sort of started and who your teacher was, and depending on what you're doing, sometimes those aren't the best ways to work with solder, and they're not always the best forms just as they are. So being able to use some different forms of solder can help. Changing the form of solder from its natural state can help. So anyway, we're going to talk a little bit about that as soon as Julia tunes in. And like I said, we've got the Solder Essentials class coming up on Saturday. So if you're interested in some good solder tips and tricks and solving some problems that you might have with soldering things together and connecting things, definitely going to be able to solve some problems for you too. A lot of people aren't real confident with soldering, or they have problems and questions, and why isn't it working the way it's supposed to, and why doesn't it flow when it's supposed to, and oh hey, there's Julia. So yeah, let's go live with Julia and talk a little bit about that. So if you want to join us, we have a couple of seats left, and we are, oh, there you are. Hi, there's your bookshelf. There she is.
Hello, I am.
So, yeah.
Trying to get myself organized. Sorry.
Yeah. So anyway, but that's what we're going to do this weekend. So if you have any issues, any problems, bring it with you. There are a couple of seats left, and happily join us on Saturday morning to talk more about tips and tricks for solder and soldering essentials and what we can do to make your life that much easier. So yeah, but I had mentioned I wanted to talk solder with Julia tonight. She's got some great tips for that. And so, I think everybody probably, when they're first learning how to solder, it's like, get yourself a foot of hard, medium, and easy solder wire. And so everybody kind of starts there. And that's okay when you're first learning, because it's easy to clip it and easy to sort of stick it where you want it to go. But I know a lot of people are sort of like, great, but then what? So Julia here has a tip for the wires. So for those of you that don't know this is really helpful. So yeah, Julia, show us that.
So here's my hard, medium, and easy solder.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a standard thing. Like, I learned this at the Pratt when I took my first class with metal working with Virginia Causey. Shout out to Virginia Causey.
Yeah.
If you have wire solder, this looks like silver wire, and so you want to distinguish it some way from any other piece of silver wire on your bench. So for hard solder, you bend 3 bends, doink, doink, doink. And for medium solder, you bend 2 bends. And for easy solder, you bend 1 bend.
Right.
And then of course you cut away the other end.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and that way it distinguishes it from all of your other solders, because it looks,
all of the other,
and wire, because everything looks like sterling.
Everything just looks like silver. Exactly.
Right. And this does have a fine silver content. So, they all do, and just varying degrees. So they all are silver. But yeah, so it's very difficult to tell by color, and if you're trying to sort it out, it can be real tricky. So yeah, so I always say it's easy to make 1 bend,
right?
Nice. I like that.
Right?
Easy to make one bend.
Easy to make one bend. It's, medium skill will give you 2. And
Nice.
it's hard to make 3. So yeah, there you go. So hard, medium, and easy. So
Yeah.
but those can be like the simplest, most basic beginning place to start with your solder. And solder wire usually comes in 22 gauge and 20 gauge, so you can get it in a couple of different gauges. But you can also, instead of clipping it and trying to stick it where you want it, you can also flatten it and use it as like a soldered chip rather than soldered wire, so it won't roll around.
So you take the wire and flatten it.
Yes.
Yeah, so then you have a little ribbon.
Yes.
And then you can take your clippers and you can actually cut down the long of the ribbon and then cut across. So you can get much, and you can do that with a hammer. Like we would always do it with a rolling mill at Pratt. That's where I learned it.
Yeah.
But you don't have to do it with the rolling mill. You can hit it with a hammer.
Absolutely.
It's okay if it's work hardened. Don't try to anneal it.
Yes. No.
Don't try to anneal it.
Yeah. So having, the solder wire on hand all the time is great. One of the workshops I've got coming up is the snakeskin and wire pattern workshop that's coming up. And you're going to
need to buy a lot of solder for that one.
You need feet of solder for that. So it's because it becomes its own color. It becomes a different color in the mix. But
it's like colored glue.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the other thing that is out there that you probably know about is sheet solder. And the sheet solder is fantastic because you can just clip it to the size that you want. And you've got the solder clippers that make the little solder chips exactly the same size you want. So
I don't use them for solder. I only use them for making granulation granules.
But
I use my Joyce Chen shears.
Yeah, I usually use those too. And I actually have like seam ripper shears that I use for my solder as well. But the and the nice metal shears like that. And these can be a little overkill when you're working with, thin sheets sometimes. So, because what I do with mine, and what I do with mine is run it through the rolling mill. And so what was, 2 inches of solder is now 4 inches of solder. So I've got, twice as much solder, and it's thinner. So a lot of people, when they're first learning how to solder, a lot of times they're putting on too much. And it's easy to add a little bit more, but it's really a pain in the butt to take it away. So
you can do it, but it's very hard.
And it's very labor intensive usually. But and I think, using less solder is one of those things that you kind of get to the point where you're like, oh my God, can I just not have to use so much solder? And that's the answer.
Clean it up later.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So by milling it down, you can cut it the same size, right? And it's just less solder. And what's your tip for sheet solder?
So this piece has actually been rolled through the rolling mill. This piece would have started out about the same size as this. Like this is the hard one. And then this is one that's been rolled. It's like twice as long.
Right.
And this is really stiff. Like I can't really bend it. And then this is like heavy foil. It's really easy
it's
to
like,
bend, which makes
like 28-30 gauge. I close mine all the way down and run it through multiple times.
Right.
Yeah.
And it makes it much easier to cut the little fringe on it and make the little solder chips too, if it's thin.
Yeah,
but my thing that I do is I actually cover this is 3 little pieces of solder. So this is hard. Whoops, let me do it the right way. So this is hard, medium, and easy. So I take Sharpie markers. They're just regular Sharpie markers in red, black, and blue. Blue is cool, so it's easy. And then hard is hot, so it's, hottest temperature. So it's red for hot, and then black is just the one in the middle. And if you paint the Sharpie marker on it, 2 things. One, it helps keep your solder clean because solder will tarnish because of the silver, and then the oxides will actually get in the way and impede your ability for it to flow. So keeping the Sharpie marker on it keeps it clean. And then if you have a little snippet of solder on your bench and it's red, it's hard.
Yeah.
If you have a little snippet of silver solder on your bench, you have no idea whether it's hard, medium, or easy. But if it's red, it's hard. If it's blue, it's easy. And if it's black, it's medium. And then this one, I had Sharpie markered it before I rolled it. And so, of course, it stretched the ink out, which is why it's gray.
Well, and the thing that a lot of people don't realize is that there's also extra easy which is a lower melting temperature.
Mhm.
And as you were saying earlier, different manufacturers may have slightly different
Oh, yeah.
alloys,
Oh,
and
they
that can
do.
change.
They categorically, they do.
Yeah. So it's really important when you're buying your solder to double check the
Right.
standard for what their melting temperatures are. Which is really important when you're trying to work with stuff like that and
Yeah, I
to not
have.
melt your work. However, if you're working with like Argentium, you don't ever want to use. I don't usually ever use hard solder on Argentium or on brass, because brass is basically like solder, and
Yeah.
so using hard, and their melting temperatures are almost identical as hard solder, most hard solders. So I always use medium and lower melting solders on Argentium and or brass.
Brass.
The other thing is that they do make an Argentium solder now as well,
Mhm.
which really make things a lot better because the color match is better and the temperatures are lower. And so if you're working with Argentium, and Argentium fuses really well too, so you've got a couple of other options with Argentium. But yeah, and there's also, for those of you that are working with copper and or brass, they actually do make a copper solder, and they make a yellow silver solder and or brass solder that
I have to
is.
say though, the yellow silver solder,
Mhm.
it's actually more of a gray color.
It is,
Like it
yeah,
doesn't really come out. It doesn't come out shiny like silver, but it doesn't come out.
yellow.
It's not really yellow
Right,
color.
right.
It's
Hi,
more
Peter.
of a gray.
Hi, Peter. How are
So
you?
yeah,
Yeah,
but
and
it
Kyle.
is it's really interesting that the chemical properties of an alloy is
Yeah.
that the melting point goes down. And so like a solder is an alloy, so that's why it has a lower melting point, but so is brass.
Yes, yeah.
Which is why
So
it has a lower melting point.
right, and a
So
lot of the things that make brass are the things that make solder solder. So
exactly.
you have
It's
to be a
the
little bit
zinc.
careful. Yeah.
Yep.
So so yeah, so the yellow silver solder too for me, color match wise. Hi Helen. There's Helen, one of our little foxes. So the yellow silver solder is also not a great match for brass. I know a lot of people like to use it for brass and are a little disappointed with the color not quite matching brass.
Right.
And here's the thing about brass and bronze that a lot of people don't understand is that with sterling and gold, you've got carats, you have alloys that are international standards that you have to stick with, and if you're going to be stamping them and whatnot. But with brass and bronze, there are hundreds and hundreds of different alloys that are in the brass family and in the bronze family, and sometimes they sort of cross a little bit, and so they're engineered and formulated to have very distinctive properties and colors associated with them, and working properties as well. So some are, made to be, for like bell brass, which has a particular auditory sort of sound to it when it's hit. And then you've got like a boat bronze or brass that's used for railings and things, and it's designed to be machined and turned and not rust and patina. So you've got, lots of different alloys in those families that is not a standard. So if you go any place and it's like, yeah, I need some brass, and if it's a sheet metal place, they're going to be like, what kind of brass? Because there are so many different
Do you need
colors.
360? Do you need,
Yeah.
what do you need?
You need red brass, yellow brass. What do you need? It's like brass, standard brass. So yeah, but not getting too much into the alloys though. I usually do.
That's a rabbit hole that
That's a whole nother thing.
We're not going down that one.
Yeah, but for
it is
the
true.
solders for that, what I will do a lot of times with the copper is I will just pickle plate my copper things, and I do the same thing with a lot of brass because it'll pink up that solder just a little bit. And instead of trying to use a solder match on those. But then there's also carotid gold alloys that are designed as solder as well. So you can get different alloys for that. And those are all going to have different melting temperatures as well. So
yes, they are. And they're different. In addition to having different carats, you have different colors.
Yeah.
So you will have, green gold easy 14 karat solder, and then red gold, hard 18 karat solder. I mean, it's like
Yeah, and a lot of goldsmiths do carrot their own and alloy their own solders and make those from scratch, so they know exactly what they've got. Because sometimes when you're looking, the choices can be a little bit limited and not match your gold that you're trying to put
Right.
together exactly.
Yeah.
So a lot of goldsmiths will actually produce their own gold alloys for their solder, so they know exactly what they've got color-wise too. However, the other thing that a lot of people don't know about, and I was always, told, oh no, it's not any good, don't use it, is solder paste.
Yes. Oh my
Solder
God, that
paste,
stuff is the best.
it is amazing. And for production stuff,
In the right place,
yeah,
right? Like
for
it's like
production
anything.
stuff, it's amazing.
Hmm.
So at work, when I'm doing, like today, when I'm doing a couple hundred pairs of earrings, this becomes a lifesaver and a time saver, and that means, time's money when you're doing production stuff. And it's a little bit different than your regular solders because it already has the flux mixed in.
Right.
So it's just like a paste,
Hmm.
and it has a silver quantity in it as well. So when you're buying an ounce of this, you're buying basically something that has an ounce of silver and flux mixed together. And there are people that do make their own
Hmm.
solder paste like that will file their solder sheet and mix their own borax and do it all from scratch, old school, and
I'm
that's
gonna buy
great.
it.
Yep.
Thank you very much. From
And
Okai Corporation. They're great.
but this one is another great option, which is shout out to Victoria Lansford. And
Victoria Lansford.
yeah, we love Victoria.
Yay, Victoria.
And her Russian filigree powder. And
Hmm.
this stuff is fantastic for doing filigree because it is really has a couple of really good qualities about it that a lot of people don't quite understand. When you're doing filigree, you want the solder to sink in, and so it has the solder and the flux mixed into it, but it's a powder, so it's dry, and you mix it with water to
Distilled
achieve
water.
distilled water
Hmm.
to get the consistency that you want, and it
Hmm.
sucks into the filigree wires, and but it is flexible enough that you can bend it and shape it without cracking. And a lot of times filigree, or a lot of times just regular solder, can be a little brittle and a little stiff, and this has a lot more flexibility to it,
Hmm. Hmm.
which is really kind of interesting. And every time with any solders, every time you melt it and reflow it, you're
Yes.
burning out a little bit of that alloy
Zinc.
that makes it
The
melt,
zinc. Yeah.
and its melting temperature goes
Yeah.
up by degrees the next time you
It's
try
about
and solder
25
something.
degrees. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's like every time you remelt it, you lose a little zinc and you gain about 25 degrees
yeah,
in its melting temperature, which
right.
can be helpful, can be
Yeah,
useful. But you have to know that to be
yeah.
able to use it.
It's
I
going to
was
be,
going to
yeah,
say, before we get past the paste solder,
yeah,
um, a little note for you guys out there in terms of safety. The flux that is integral to paste solder is a fluoride flux. It has fluoride in it.
mhm.
So that's fine. That you still use it. That's great. You just must use it with good ventilation.
Well,
That's all.
anytime you're soldering, always use good ventilation.
Anytime you're soldering, but just, this is not a fluoride-free flux, the one
Yeah.
that's in the paste
Well,
solder. It
and
has
and
fluorides in
you
it.
know, here's the thing about a lot of the solders and the fluxes nowadays too, is that this industry has gotten very, very safe because of the number of people that are doing this at home.
Yes.
OSHA and the standards have been about the time that right before this sort of took off as a big hobby back in the 80s, 70s, and 80s. OSHA was like crashing into a lot of the industries as well. And so fortunately for the jewelry industry and people who are doing jewelry at home, the safety levels have gone up so
Yes.
significantly in the
Yes.
last 30 years that, people are like, oh, it's lead free pewter. And I'm like, well, pewter's been lead free for 100 years. It's like, you don't need to worry about that. But it does have antimony in it and tin. So it's, there's other things. But, anytime you're doing something like this, it's good to know all the safety things too.
Mhm.
Um, and also take it with a grain of salt. work like it's cumulative effects, and but be aware that, if you're doing this as a hobby, if you're doing it occasionally, it's the exposure levels are,
Right. No. I wasn't trying to
low.
say somebody was going to like destroy their lungs from using a little bit of paste solder.
True. But you always do, safety wise, you always want to.
I think what you just said about protect yourself like it's cumulative on always, then you're always doing the right thing to protect yourself, and then you will be safe from not just this but other issues as well.
Right.
So
So anyway, but solder. So there's it's such a huge field, and I always try and tell people that, when they're soldering, solder is a word like paint, that it's, are you talking about, painting a house on the outside, or, and if you are you going to use latex? Are you going to use oil? Or are you just going to put on plastic siding? There's so many ways to just paint the house. Or are you going to do the interior? Or are you going to do a watercolor of the house? Or then there's wash or oils or acrylics, and solder is like that too, because depending on what you're doing, solder can be used in a lot of different ways for a lot of different purposes. And depending on who you're talking to, they will have different tips for soldering because they found ways that work for what they're doing. And so it's like painting in a way, because it can be very personalized, and a lot of people have found really good solutions for what they do, but that doesn't work on every single situation.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. What works to put on an earring post doesn't necessarily work to put on the post on a belt buckle. Right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Scale is important. And,
I mean, for doing like the snakeskin, I mean, I'm stick feeding that stuff in. It is just because I'm flooding it. And and trying to put like little chips on there would never, you could not fill it fast enough.
It's
So
not happening.
Yeah.
Do you put it in a tube and use it that way, or do you just hold it in a crock-lock tweezers and just feed it in? You just hold it in a roll and feed it in.
Yep.
Yeah. I was going to say, actually, that technically what we do is brazing.
True.
And technically soldering is actually low temperature soldering, which has a rosin core. It's like what's used with the
it's tin soldering usually. It's considered tin soldering.
So that will confuse beginners as well. Because
and it'll confuse, and people that do welding and stuff, it'll confuse them because they're like, this isn't solder.
This is soldering. This is brazing, right? People, what the F? Why are you all,
but
all
in the jewelry world, the terminology for it is solder. And so if
you're in the UK,
true,
or
solder, yes, and hi Patty, hello.
But you will learn all those things, and you will learn so many tricks from Jennifer in the soldering essentials class. You should take soldering essentials. Even if you have had soldering with another instructor,
absolutely,
it's always a good idea to learn soldering from like Jennifer said, from more than one person, because everybody sets things up a little differently. And you can always find something that will help you. And even if all you're doing is corroborating that what you're doing is right.
Well, and just between the solders, the fluxes, the picks, the whatever you're doing to try to get things scored and fill a hole or drop a bezel down, and there's so many little tricks and problem solving things along the way that devices for soldering stuff that it can make a big difference in what you're doing. But so yes, we've got lots of fun classes coming up, and let's see. So granulation part 2 is coming up on the 5th.
Granulation part 2 coming up on the 5th. Yes, that's what I use my solder snips for, is actually cutting little short pieces of wire to melt into granules. I don't actually use them for solder snips.
Right.
And I actually use my pickle to plate the granules. So
well, we've got
that technique too.
And that's part of our adding gold series. And a lot of people want to add gold in ways that is, because the gold pricing right now is so expensive that it's really kind of nice to lower the cost by adding gold on, by doing things like decorative things like adding gold granulation, which Julia's doing on the 5th, or gold overlay, which I'm doing. Where are those earrings?
The earrings that you posted as your picture for that class look so good. I love all those. They're so fun.
Yeah. So
such
gold
a great way to use up
overlay.
your scrap gold.
Yes. So gold overlay is kind of cool because you don't have to have a particular foil or a particular carat or anything like that. And some of mine's done with, I mean, I've got gold-filled wires on here, but the gold wire that's on here was like left over from a little scrap detail from a spring that I was making, and I just sort of pulled it apart and hammered it, so I get little swirls. But yeah, I mean, you could go to, Goodwill and pick up like an old broken, 14 karat gold ring for, or go to the pawn shop or look in your jewelry box for that leftover gold earring and find a way to use it. So gold overlay gives you a way to sort of add that color to the surface without it having to be like Kambu and a little more technical, which you're teaching coming up on the
I don't know, because
on June 16th. On June 16th. So we've got Kambu's coming up. So adding gold series, that's going really well. Also, too, we're going to be introducing Jan Smith soon. She's going to be our enameling instructor.
Her class has already got like several people signed up. Like I put it up. I made the class live, and like I swear to God, within like an hour, someone had, before we'd even said anything about the class, someone was like, "Oh, Jan Smith, enameling."
Yeah, I know we a couple of our people knew that she was going to be joining soon. So yeah, but that's going to fill up really fast. So if you're interested in learning about setting up your studio for enameling, she's going to do that first. Yeah. And then the intro.
What tools you need. She's going to talk about kilns, which is one of the things. When I was chatting with her recently, she was talking about how the Paragon kilns, a lot of them have the controllers at the top. Yeah. And when you open the door, it basically just floods it with heat from the kiln, and it burns out the controller. And I'm like, of course. It never occurred to me. But this is the kind of thing she'll help you figure out, like, what kind of kiln would make sense. And she uses kilns that she doesn't even use a controller. Right. Yeah. Her kilns are like these sort of octagonal ones.
Oh yeah.
And
like ceramic kilns.
Like when?
Like ceramic kilns.
Like a little bit, but they're on their side. Like they open the door opens this way. They're not sitting this way. They're like this. So the door opens like that. But they're like an octagon or hexagon that's sitting like this, like a stop sign.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
So
that's cool.
Yeah. So
that's coming up.
She'll tell you all about like the ins and outs of kilns. So.
Oh, and you know what? You've got boxes and lockets coming up. Lockets.
I do.
Starting.
Yeah, people had asked about that class, and so we put that back on the schedule.
Yeah, but we're going to be doing a couple of things that would be really fun before then. So roller mill textures and etch in a bag. It's going to be fun. And so those kinds of things by decorating the surface and getting like really cool patterns. Then do the boxes. Class and learn how to get all that stuff together. And then the lockets and work on hinges and catches and all kinds of cool things too. So
so you can do the roll printing class, the rolling mill essentials class, and make yard goods, make textured sheet that then you can cut up and turn into boxes or cut up and turn into lockets. I had been asked to do those classes, and normally, because my day job, I'm an academic tutor, normally in the afternoons during the week, I am 5-6 deep in kids and students during math and chemistry. So in the summertime, that's when I can do jewelry classes midweek. So boxes and lockets are set up to be, I think it's 2 consecutive, it's like Tuesday, Thursday for 2 weeks. So it's like 4 sessions over the course of 2 weeks in the afternoons on Tuesday, Thursdays. Right. So if that works for you, which I hope it does.
And the cool thing about etching is that you can make roller mill. Yeah. So these are just, low tech etched for pattern on a heavy gauge brass. So I use those, and so it's really kind of nice to just, when you have those, like you don't have time to work on a project, but you've got time to sort of like putter. It's nice to do stuff like this because you can, put it in a drawer, and then when you need pattern for something, you've got, instant pattern in your instant pattern in your drawers. So, but having stuff like that for etching, for roller mill printing, for doing those kinds of things can all help with adding visual vocabulary to your work. Adding gold can definitely add value as well. So it all just layers into your making process and into your design process. And so
I know.
That's what's coming up. So
That's
yeah.
what's coming up. Yeah, etch in a bag is going to be fun. I'm going to show people how to use the toner transfer paper that I really like.
Oh yeah.
And then a super simple, super low tech ferric
Yeah.
chloride and Ziploc bag
Yeah.
technique, which is
Roller. So
really,
cool.
really
So
easy.
cool. And that's
Yeah.
June 19th.
Yeah, that's coming up. Yeah, it's, you guys know that it's June 19th. So, save the date if you're interested in that.
Yeah.
It'll be up. I'm going to do it like today or tomorrow. I'll have it.
Yeah.
Final.
We've got so many people interested in etching, and this is a really safe, concealed way to just like
Right, super low tech, super
Yeah.
low quantity. Yeah.
right.
So, and you can actually use as a resist. You can use Sharpie markers. So it's like, I'm not going to insist that, if
Or
you
nail
wanna use it as a
polish.
resist- yes. Or Cricut silhouette cutters.
Yeah.
You can use there are a lot of different things you can use as a resist.
Paint markers,
Paint
acrylic
markers.
paint markers, Sharpie works sometimes. Yeah.
If you're
So-
interested in being able to take designs and print them with a laser printer onto this toner transfer paper, I will show you how this technique works, this material works.
That's
But
cool.
there are lots of different ways to get a resist onto the metal. And then, I'm going to show you one, and then I'm going to show you one way to etch it, right? Like there are lots of resists and there are lots of ways to etch.
Yeah.
You
You could take weeks and weeks doing that.
know,
Speaking of weeks and weeks, we've got some fun things in the works for the fall.
we do.
So, yeah.
I know. We just come up with a whole new plan.
So
The
exciting.
Foxes, we're
Yeah.
always coming up with
I
new
know.
plans.
Well, we're
Yes,
almost
tell
at our year anniversary, and
I know.
we're very
Yes.
excited.
June
And
20th. Please
June
join us,
20th.
people.
Yep. And so we're going to have our
tea.
high tea,
Our anniversary tea.
our high
2
tea,
o'clock on June 20th.
right? And so
YouTube
we're going to
Live.
have a YouTube live party, and we're going to have our valedictorians, salutatorians, and do an unboxing. We have sent a few of our little gifts out, and so they will be opening those live on June 20th.
Yep.
Also, too, we'll have some announcements of stuff coming up, and sort of talk about what's happened over the year a little bit, and say thanks to a number of people that have made this possible and a lot of fun and exciting.
Yes.
So,
We
yeah,
could not have done it without all of the people who have bought
know.
classes, watched
know.
our videos on Instagram, and supported us and cheered us on from the sidelines.
Yes, yeah, lots of people cheering on from the sidelines too, which is always great. So yeah, we love you. Thank you. Keep cheering. We need
Cheering.
send good vibes. Send good vibes. So yeah, but it's been good. It's been a really crazy. Everybody's like, it's a crazy year. It's like, yeah.
Crazy year to start business, but it kept me sane.
Yeah,
Made me crazy and kept me sane at the same time.
exactly. I had I was doing being interviewed for an article that's coming up in Ornament Magazine, I think. And there's so many, but I know. But one of the questions was, when everything went on pause, and I'm like, nothing went on pause for me. I was like scrambling to figure out what we were going to do and how we were going to do it, and looking forward to continuing and how we were going to make things go. And so for us, it was just like not pausing, but springing forward.
Like the fox diving into the snow.
Exactly. Yeah, that's one of the reasons our fox is that, like, it's like, use research. Thanks, Rhett and Link. And use research and dive in. But yeah, so anyway, but we've got some fun stuff coming up, and that will be a big party. And we will, I think we did an announcement of that, and we'll send out a reminder before that comes out. So letting you know. So hopefully everybody can join us and see that on YouTube if you want to follow along later. And Kenzie says, I hope one day I can be a student, not just a cheerleader. I love you guys. We love you too.
We do.
Kenzie, love you. So hugs. That's a hug, by the way. hugging you. So hug. So anyway, but if you missed the beginning of this and you want to go back and watch our little tips on solder, do that. And if you're like, I'm not solder, I'm terrible, my soldering sucks, join me on Saturday.
Join Jennifer, please.
What, $45?
Do yourself and your work a favor. join Jennifer because she will help you solve all those problems.
Let me solve your solder problems.
Let me help you solve your solder problems, says, Guru Jennifer, and she'll do just that.
Yeah. All right. Well, anyway, thanks everybody. And hopefully, and by the way, if you guys have anything that you would like us to unbox on one of our unboxing videos, feel free to contact us. And if you've got tools or things that you want to show, we're happy to do that and share it with the world. So yeah, we've gotten some wonderful things and made some wonderful friends doing unboxings. And so yeah, we can do that. Let us know. Anyway, check our website at littlemetalfoxes.com and follow us on our Instagram.
On Instagram and Facebook. And we'll see you in a week.
Yeah. Hopefully we'll see some of you on Saturday. So anyway, thanks a lot. We'll see you next time. Bye.